What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we have an interesting one. We are going to be taking the greatness of the HKS and combining it with the greatness of Corksport, and we're going to combine them together and make an interesting creation, an interesting sound. Well, what do I mean by that? I picked up the Corksport Midpipe, so we're going to have a complete catback exhaust system, which is going to give us a pretty interesting note and some decent power gains.
More power, baby! Yeah! Do it, me! More power, baby!
Nothing crazy, but you know, having a full complete catback system will guarantee us some torque and some power gains. I'm not going to waste any time. We're gonna hop right into this install. All right, guys, so first things first, what you're gonna do is jack the car up, put it on jack stands. I have it like on the highest setting completely possible because I gotta be able to fit underneath there. Prove to you guys that you can do this yourself. You do not need to go to a shop. So let's go ahead and hop underneath the car and see what we need to do. Okay, guys, so here we are starting in the back. First things first, what we're gonna be doing is removing these two exhaust bolts right here. If you have the OEM muffler, it's gonna be a 14mm bolt. I have the HKS, it came with different bolts, so this is a 17 for me, but the process is exactly the same. So remove these two bolts, we'll separate the muffler from the mid-pipe, and then we'll go on to the next step. Okay, so we got the bolts out, we can separate the two. We just let it hang right there, just like that for the mid-pipe. I believe the kit's gonna be coming with new gaskets. Just keep the old gasket on your factory mid-pipe, just leave it with that. Now make sure you put all these nuts and bolts in a secure spot where you know, because we're gonna be putting all this back together. So just make sure you have this in a spot where you know you're, where it's gonna be safe and you won't forget anything, okay? So now let's go ahead and move towards the middle of the car and see what we gotta do next. What we're gonna be doing now is removing our heat shield. We have 5 bolts that we're gonna be removing, and we have, looks like we have 4 pop rivets that we're gonna be pulling out. Now on the Corksport instructions, they're a little bit different. I'm gonna assume it might be for the models. This is the front wheel drive version, obviously, but the heat shield was built a little bit different from their instructions. I'm gonna assume this might be for 2019, 2020. I'm not sure when they changed this, but for the 2019 and whenever they change this, some of y'all might have 8 bolts to remove compared to my 5. So same process, just remove 8 bolts instead of 5 if you have 8. It's just anything that's on this heat shield, okay? So let's go ahead and remove those bolts. So with the heat shield removed, we have one more brace we're gonna have to remove, so let's go on to that next. All right, guys, so moving on to the next brace, we have this X looking brace right here for the mid-pipe. We're gonna start off by removing these two 10mm bolts and then these two plastic rivets. So with those done, next we're gonna be removing these two 10mm bolts right here. Now we're gonna take our 12mm socket and remove the last 8 bolts. All right, now we can move on to our last brace. We have 4 12mm sockets that we're gonna be removing. For the next step, what we're gonna be doing is, this is gonna be for the O2 sensor and cylinder deactivation. We're gonna be removing these 2 bolts right here. They're 2 10mm bolts. So with that done, guys, now you're gonna follow these steps if you have a cylinder deactivation. And if you can see that, I clearly don't have it on my car, but there's the cylinder deactivation module right there. It's gonna be connected right toward, it's gonna be sitting right here on your mid-pipe. It's just this giant module. What you'd be doing is right here in purple, you just unplug that from the module. So if you have cylinder deactivation, you have just one more step that you gotta do. So just unplug another wire. What we're gonna do now is pull down this flap and we will be exposed to the O2 sensor. So we'll just unplug the O2 sensor. Went in here, popped out both these clips, unplugged our O2 sensor from its port right here. So now we're left with just this hanging here. And now the next step is just to unbolt the rest of the mid-pipe. All we're gonna do is take a 14mm socket and remove these 2 nuts, and we can finally pull this thing off. Now we can pull the mid-pipe off from this last bushing, and we can pull the thing all the way off. Well, here they are, guys, side by side. If I didn't mention it earlier, this is the Corksport 63.5 millimeter mid-pipe. The Corksport is a little bit thicker than the OEM, so it should give us a pretty decent sound. So I'm excited. So we need to remove these two 10 millimeter bolts right here. Now we're gonna be removing our O2 sensor. It says it's a 22 millimeter socket. Well, ain't nobody got time for that. I don't have a socket, O2 sensor socket, so we're gonna kinda manhandle it with some vice grips. Okay, you don't need the wrench. I did manage to get it off with the vice grips, so yeah. So we're just gonna take that off. And then we're gonna transfer that to our new one. Now what we're gonna do is take our OEM O2 sensor and screw it into place. Now it is recommended that you put some anti-seize on here. So with our anti-seize on there, what we're gonna do is start threading it on. Now take your 22 millimeter wrench, or if you're like me that doesn't have one, just take your vice grips and tighten it down. Worked exactly the same way. So we need to connect these two flanges. So what we're gonna do is take the provided hardware. We have a gasket, and we have 2 nuts, 2 bolts, and a couple washers. So we're gonna install these in this order. Obviously the gasket's gonna go in between. So we're gonna have a washer, a nut, put that through the top. Then we're gonna take our gasket, sandwich that in between. Then we're gonna put them together like that. Then we're gonna take a washer, put that on, then a lock washer, and then a nut. And we're just gonna leave everything hand tightened, just like that. That way we can make any adjustments at the very end. So work at your own pace, and we're gonna try and get this without hurting myself. All right, so we got that in the hanger. Just gonna let that chill like that. So now that we got that one exhaust hanger up, what we're gonna do now is just take a bungee cord, or like I said, get you a jack stand. So now that we got it held up pretty decently, now what we're gonna do is we're gonna check and make sure our gasket is still on the downpipe, which it is. You see here, make sure that's there, because if that's gone, you're gonna have a problem. So we're gonna get this lined up, and we can reuse our OEM bolts that came off, or Corksport provides some extra ones if you need them. So now that we have those in place, we can go ahead and start tightening them down. We need to torque these bolts down to 35 foot-pounds as per the instructions, so we'll do that. So now what we have to do is reconnect our O2 sensor. Now Corksport says that we need to remove these metal brackets, run the wire through the plastic, and just tuck it back up in here. Go ahead and reconnect the O2 sensor. Like that. Put this back up where it was. So just like that, I guess it just hangs up and sits out of the way. So we're good. Now it would be time for you guys with the cylinder deactivation, just to reconnect your cylinder deactivation module and all that good stuff. Now, all we have to do is put the armor and the heat shielding back on, and we're good to go. But from here on back, what you're gonna need to do is adjust the end of the mid pipe with your muffler. Play around with it and see where it needs to be. Check to make sure the tip fitment isn't off. Make sure they're even. Make sure one of the tips isn't like all the way over here, or one's all the way over here. Make sure it's lined up perfectly. So I'm gonna go off camera. This is gonna take some time, and play around with it until you get the fitment that you want. So with that said, let's roll the sound clips.